Today's target will be properties for solving equations. By the end of today's lesson, you will be able to use properties to justify steps when solving a multi-step equation. The previous video showed you how to solve a multi-step equation. What you should be able to do after watching this video is go back to your steps, be able to justify each step using the different properties we talk about in this video. You'll also be able to investigate and critique solutions using the properties that you learned about in this video. Now, this video is going to be very vocabulary heavy. If I start going too fast, just pause the video. Make sure you write everything down on each slide. And what we'll do is when we come into class the next time, we'll get involved with how do we use these, when do we use these, and what do problems look like when you're asked to use the properties. Okay. So let's start with some basic properties. You should really already know these, but it's not bad to write them down anyway. First is the distributive property. That is, we have A times B plus C. We distribute it and it's equal to AB plus AC. Well, for example, with numbers, you might have 4 times 5 plus x, which would be 4 times 5, which is 20, and then 4 times x, which is 4x. Okay, that's distributive property. That one's very important. We use that one a lot. The second is combining like terms. We'll call this, the actual property name for this is substitution. A little bit weird, but it's what you'll see on the SOL. It's what they call it whenever you combine like terms. So the idea here, A plus A equals 2A. A plus B cannot be combined, so it just equals A plus B. Oops. Okay. So it's simple. You should know it. Just be aware with this one that whenever you combine like terms, the SOL calls it substitution. That's what you'll see it referred to very often. All right, move on to properties of equality. Okay, so 4 properties of equality: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And these all basically say the same thing. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. It's basically our golden rule for solving equations. Okay, so basically what that means, if you use the addition property of equality, it means that if you add something to one side, you have to add it to the other. If you use the subtraction property of equality, if you subtract something from one side, you must subtract it from the other. If you use the multiplication property of equality, if you multiply one side by something, you must multiply the other side by the same thing. And the division, if you divide one side by something, you must also divide the other side by the same thing. Okay, so it's quite simply whatever you do to one side, you have to do the other. So you multiply both sides by 4, you're using the multiplication property of equality. It's that simple. Okay. Next, we have the identity and inverse properties. These are why we do what we do when we're solving equalities, or sorry, solving equations, my bad. Okay. Identity properties. There's the additive identity, and there's the multiplicative identity. The additive identity says if you add a 0 to anything, it stays the same. So A plus 0 is still A. The multiplication or multiplicative identity says if you multiply anything by 1, it stays the same. So it's very important. We can add 0 to anything, or we can multiply anything by 1, and it does not change the value of what we started with. There's also the inverse properties, and then once again we have the additive inverse and the multiplicative inverse. The additive inverse. says that if we subtract something from itself, it equals to 0. What that really means, why it's called the additive inverse, even though it looks like subtraction, is that we are adding the opposite sign. So we're really doing a plus negative a equals to 0. Next is the multiplicative. That says that if you multiply something by its reciprocal, it's equal to 1. So a times 1 divided by a is equal to 1. You could also write that as a divided by itself equals to 1. Okay. Now notice the additive inverse, we're getting the value in the additive identity. And the multiplicative inverse, we're getting the value in the multiplicative identity. Okay. So that's why when we're solving an equation, we subtract the value from both sides or add a value from both sides in order to make it disappear. What's really happening is we're adding or subtracting in order to make it equal to 0, because we know if we add 0 to anything, it stays the same. Okay. So I know these are a little bit confusing out of context, but I don't want the video to run too long. I want you to make sure you've got everything here written down in your notes. You've got all these different properties. I know it's a lot. But what we'll do when we come into class, we'll spend a little bit of time practicing solving the multi-step equations, and then we'll spend a little bit of time together looking at how do we apply these properties to different equations to justify our steps. So once again, make sure you've got all the properties down. If you've got them all down in your notes, you're good to go. You're ready for class tomorrow. Make sure you bring your notes. Make sure you are prepared.